Welcome to this episode of the Two World Podcast. I'm your co-host today, Jacob, and I'm joined by my other co-host.
I am always Barney.
Thank you, Barney. And we have a guest with us that we're really excited to introduce to you, and he is...
My name is Bill Seymour.
And we invited Bill to come onto our podcast today because he serves at Orrville Mennonite Church as the pastor. And during the pandemic, they began an outreach to the community, a Monday Meals program. And for me personally, having seen the fruits of that and hearing about it from Bill, it just seemed like a really interesting story and an interesting topic to explore on this podcast. And so we just wanted to start by going back to the beginning. And as you think of the Monday Meals program, Bill, and the need that you were trying to address when it emerged, could you tell us a little bit about how that came to you, that idea, and how it started, and maybe tell a little bit of the story behind its origin?
Sure. Well, if you think back to the beginning of 2020, even as early as the fall of 2019, there was that sniff in the air of this pandemic possibility or this strange virus that was halfway around the world. And seemed to be spreading, but I don't remember too many people, at least around these parts, that really thought anything of it other than, something else is happening around the world that we don't have to worry about because we're isolated over here. And but then as the beginning of March came, it was very quick that we went from, it's on our shores to, we're shutting everything down. And so we, all of a sudden, I didn't have a lot to do, right? There weren't meetings, there weren't gatherings, there weren't events. And our people, were wondering, okay, how will we worship and what will we do? And it dawned on a number of us that we weren't the only ones that were thrown into a state of confusion, right? That some people were out of work, and that might be challenging, and certainly there would be stresses involved with a shutdown. And we thought, we just have to ride this out together for a few months and it'll be fine. And so we asked the question, what can we do to bless the people around us? Our building sits in a neighborhood, and so we thought, what can we do to bless? Well, we can do some food. The reality is that I like to cook. I love to cook. I'm not afraid to cook for a lot of people, and the church building is right next to my house, so I had access, and so we decided that our church would start providing a meal on Mondays for anyone who wanted to come and pick it up. It's a drive-through thing, and so we just declared to the world and everybody, hey, the 23rd we're having a meal. Come on over. And at that time, it wasn't really called Monday Meals. It was just a free meal. And we had one of our members does vinyl printing, and I called her on a Friday and said, can you have a sign for me by Monday? And she printed it on a big piece of felt that kind of looked like a T-shirt. And so every the first Monday we put an A-frame sign out front that we had for another thing, and we just put this giant T-shirt over it with the announcement of the meal. And but the idea of it was to be a blessing to those around us in a hard time in the name of Jesus. And so the food need was important, but more we were interested in just giving life. So that's how we started.
Yeah, I remember the whole process maybe very clearly, being here in Japan, being closer to the source maybe. And just the general feel here was really inward looking. What's happening to me? What will happen to my plans? What's going to happen to me? I'm really moved by your story, and I would just love to hear a little bit more about the process. Like, was it a feeling of the Spirit moved someone, or just as a group? How did you come up with this amazing idea that had such, really, like you say, could really be an amazing blessing, but to get away from looking inwardly and to see how you could really provide outwardly? What was the kind of step-by-step process that led you guys to that idea?
I would say there's not a step-by-step process. It was a couple of us were talking and thinking out loud. I think the beginning of whatever process there was, which wasn't, was we don't want to focus on what we can't do and what we've lost. We want to focus on how we can be a blessing to others. So, as far as process, that was pretty much it. And then a couple of us were talking, and I said, well, I like to cook. I'm here. I have extra time now. Why don't we do a meal? And again, we thought it would be, a month, 2 months, 3 months at the most, and then we'd be fine. And while we're still going. But I wish I could say we had an organized, intentional, this is what, but it was, it was simply from that notion of, well, we could be sad, and think about what we can't do, or we could just try and be a blessing. And for that, that's the story I tell, and for that I am immensely proud of our people for being able to think like that.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost more of a testament that it came about that way instead of coming through from flowcharts and meetings and things like that. It really just came, right? That's just amazing.
One of the things that you said towards the beginning of your sharing that really caught my attention was that cooking was something that you liked to do and you had access. And this whole this concept of access is so interesting when we're talking about the pandemic, because really what we had during the pandemic was a loss of access to community and connection. Many of us in our churches, all we could do would be to offer digital things, streaming of services or digital prayer meetings through Zoom. But you found a way to actually take something physical, tactile and tangible, and give it to people. Like, you set it up so they could drive through, which is safe. During the pandemic, they could still feel safe, but they had access to something that actually was physical, that they could receive into their very body. And I think that whole idea of access is so interesting. And I also noticed that your sign, at least at one point, it started to also incorporate Spanish. Is that correct? For the Monday meal?
Yes, even that first
t-shirt
one. Sign did. Yep. Okay, so it still does. Yeah.
And that's another aspect of access. Like, you're trying to make this available to all the members, or as many members of the Orrville community as possible. And so I kind of just wonder if you would unpack a little bit more, if you have any thoughts about that idea of access. Like, in a time when people didn't have access, you're trying to give them something that made them feel blessed, and you gave it to them in a way that was safe, but it went beyond what you typically could do at that time. It was something physical, and I wonder if you have any thoughts as you hear that, or if you even thought of that. Maybe, I don't know.
You're making me sound really smart, and it really was just a couple of us sitting around going, oh, well, what can we do? Well, let's cook. It wasn't any more complicated than that. Now, there was a decision at that very beginning to put all of our information out in both Spanish and English. But what I can say is that all three of the things that you've identified here, or three or four, are things that we had already been working on. So the first thing is, I've been learning Spanish. We have a number of Spanish speakers, mostly Anglo-Spanish speakers in our congregation. We have a relationship to our local Hispanic ministries, and we have, even in our 5 church group, we have a relationship with a number of Spanish speakers. So we already had that as part of who we are. And again, I like to cook. And I think I'm a pretty good cook. And so it was, okay, what do we have on hand? Well, we have a cook who doesn't have anything to do right now, and doesn't know what being a pastor means, at least for the moment. And we had done some work internally for some years about just walking with people, meeting people where they are, and so all of those just converged, and I think that's what God used to say, hey, why don't you cook a meal and see what happens. I guess the only really intentional piece of that was to include Spanish language in our publications.
It's amazing to think of even the meaning of the word pastor, right? You said you were a pastor not knowing what to do, and it often brings to mind the shepherd. And of course, the shepherd's duty is to provide food for the sheep. I'm curious, what was the response the very first time? Did you have enough food? Did you have too much food? And then how has it gone since then? Do you see kind of repeat people? Have you seen people kind of show more interest in the Orrville Mennonite from this? Or how has it progressed in what, I guess it's been a year and a half that you've been doing this?
Roughly, yeah. Yeah, I'm laughing because all of your questions speak to our organization and why we're still operating out of our elbows. I mean, we have a little bit of organization, but mostly it's out of our elbows. So the first meal, I started cooking some pork butts to make barbecue pork sandwiches, and we were planning 2 sides, and I don't remember what they were. And that was because the containers we bought had 1 big hole and 2 small holes, and so we thought, all right, well, this is what our meals are going to be. But when I woke up that morning of the meal, I started the meat the night before. When I woke up that morning, I felt sick, so I called a family who has experience in meal ministries in their town, and said, "Hey, I'm not feeling good. Would you? I don't know what's going on. Could you come and do this?" So they did the first meal, and that was really good. And I think I was thinking 200 folks would come, and I think 80 came. I just didn't know. And then the next day or the day after, I got some communication. Turns out there's another hot meal in town. I knew that, but it didn't even dawn on me that, well, maybe I ought to ask them what they're doing and what's going on, and if we should do this. So we started communicating with them, and they were very gracious, and we have shared and continue to share lots of information, and are committed to each other, not to compete, and to support each other and encourage each other. Out of that, actually, the food providers in Orrville, we get together on Zoom a couple times a year, just to make sure we all know what we are doing. There's the Salvation Army has food available, and another church has a food pantry once a month, and another church has a Tuesday lunch during the school year, and then there's a Friendship Meals organization that uses space in a church building to do a meal on Thursdays, and then we have our meal on Mondays. And so it kind of feels like the food needs in Orrville are fairly well tended, and we all talk to each other and help each other out.
Yeah, it's interesting, Bill, as you talked about the kind of working from your elbows and the dynamic, kind of spontaneous nature of your work. Like sometimes you feel sick, or sometimes you have to navigate this or that. And I remember one of our pastors' meetings during the pandemic, coming there to Orrville and cutting up some potatoes with some of the other pastors. And I was so grateful, because none of us really, as far as I know, had access to like service opportunities at that time. But because you were doing that, we were able to come in and do a little service. So even if it's a small little example, and that's like Barney said, for a pastor, to feed somebody that does connect with the calling of nurturing
Sure.
and blessing people. I was kind of wondering about your interactions with those that you're serving, and as you have offered this, do you find that you've met people that you wouldn't otherwise have met, and what has that been like? Have you learned anything from those interactions? Has it had an impact on you? I'm wondering if there's a sense in which this has drawn you outside of your bubble or your typical sphere of ministry or life at all. Any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'll start with I'm not the only one who does this, and while I am the regular cook, I don't do it alone. In the beginning, because we wanted to be careful about people contact, it was really just my family or another family or another family. There were, I think, 4 families provided the meal or prepared the meals, and I think in the first iteration of the Monday meals, which was April, May, June, and July, basically the end of March, we 4 families made all those meals because we didn't feel like we ought to put people in proximity to each other who weren't already kind of in a bubble, and so that's how that went. Then we thought, well, we're going to stop and see if we need to start back up, or we're just going to. I mean, again, we didn't do this intending to be an ongoing thing. In the last month, in July, a woman stopped the day that due to the pandemic, her job stopped, and she picked up a meal and she said, I could come and help, and so she came to help the next week, I think, and then when we stopped, we were off for I think 2 months. When we started back up, we wanted to start back up with a little bit more organization, and so I called her and said, hey, would you help me lead this thing? And so at the moment, she and I are partners in leading this, and so she is a community person I would have never met if she hadn't come to the meal and volunteered. We have as volunteers, we've gotten to know a lot of the folks who come, even though it's still just drive-through. And I noticed, for me, again, because my house is right here too, in this neighborhood, and due to the pandemic, I spent a lot of time outside, and we didn't spend a lot of time traveling. And so I also got to know people as they walked past my fence, because there's a sidewalk at the edge of my fence, and so so we got to know folks. I would say that one of the effects of the meal is that probably 4 or 5 or 8 of us feel a lot more connected with our neighborhood than we did before. And that's partly due to the pandemic realities of having a little more time just to be here, and partly due to the meals, and partly due to the other thing that we did during the pandemic was we expanded our garden, our gardens that we allow folks in our neighborhood to just come and garden for themselves. And so with all of those interactions, we a lot of us just feel like we are a little more part of our neighborhood here. What we have gotten to learn in terms of talking to people is there basically are 3 categories of folks, I think, who come to take our meals. One category, and as far as we can tell, and this is not scientific, it's about a third. There are a third of the people who really need the food. There are about a third of the folks who eat better because of the food. They could make it and it'd be okay, but this just helps them out a bit. And there are a third of the people for whom it is a huge stress relief point. Our favorite story there is one lady who came and shared that, with our parking lot queen. That's what I call her, Bev. She takes care of getting the food into the hands of the folks on the cars. And so she's the one that talks to everybody with her crew. And she told the story about a lady who said to her, I take care of my aging mom, and I work, and I come home from work, and then I have to cook, and she eats while I'm cooking and all that. And she said, I'm really grateful for this meal because I can just take it home, and my mom and I can sit at the table and look at each other and eat and just be with each other. And that just really touches our hearts. And so, those are basically the three kinds of folks. We still don't have, we have made an intentional choice along the way that this ministry is not just about a food need, but it's also about the stress need and just to be a blessing. And so we have adopted over time. We kind of started this way, but we've adopted over time that what we're trying to do is again, in Jesus' name, we want to give food that we are willing to serve to company in our homes. Obviously we can't serve grilled steaks, but if somebody wanted to go and donate us a bunch of steaks, we'd happily serve grilled steaks. But it's just not, it just can't be done, right? But we want a quality of food that's good. That's what we strive for. We want our portions to be generous, and we give people whatever they ask. If they want 12 meals, they get 12 meals. And we might ask them why, but that's not going to affect whether they get them. And we have asked why. We have a few folks who come for a bunch of meals, and mostly the reasons are they are spreading them around their neighborhood because a couple people can't drive. One woman brings some meals to a group home. Another brings, for a mom who doesn't have a car or a person who just can't get out at the time. And so we notice that in the community, a lot of people are caring for each other, and we're just joining their efforts. And we're happy to do so.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you shared some of those stories, especially the memorable interactions that you had. That was going to be maybe my last question. It's just been so wonderful having you here with us today. Especially one of our big themes is always hospitality, and of course next week is Thanksgiving. So this topic is very apropos.
Yeah.
I'm curious, before we wrap things up, are there any final comments or final observations that either of you wanted to share?
Well, I'll address the question I didn't answer. Are we seeing folks on Sunday morning because of this? And the answer is no. That doesn't mean we won't, but that's not what we're looking for. If it happens, great, but that's not a condition we are putting on these meals. And I think that part of hospitality is very important, that the church is not just about Sunday morning. Yes, that's a public time and it's an important time, but the church, the church is alive and well all week long, because the church is the people. And so we've been looking just to be embodiments of the love of God wherever we are, right? And so if that means Sunday morning gets boosted, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. So we're comfortable just trying to follow the gifts that God has given us and the situation that God has put us in, and trust God for everything else.
Maybe one thing I'll say too to piggyback on that is I really like the image you shared of the woman having a meal with her mom and being there together and enjoying the food and being in each other's presence. And it made me think a little bit about like the heart of what we desire for our communities, and particularly it made me think about when we celebrate communion, it's supposed to be this celebration of connectedness in Jesus, and sitting around together and feeling that sense of belonging and of love and of God's presence with us. And any way that we can be connected to that is life-giving and give people a taste of that. And it feels like in some way that gift to that woman of her having that time with her mom is an experience of that sense of communion that God wants for us. And it's a beautiful image. I find it's very inspiring.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that you're doing this ministry, and so grateful that you came to share with us about it. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. I do want to say one more thing. I'm sorry. We also have learned that not only can't we do this alone, but we also shouldn't and don't need to. The other sense of community and communion that we have is the churches in our little network here have jumped on to help, and we get help with volunteers, we get help with finances, we get a lot of help with finances. And I hear stories from Martins and from Worcester and from Oak Grove and others about how blessed they are to, and how happy they are to be a part of what really we are all doing together. So there are a boatload of people and a number of congregations now that are partners with us in this effort, and that includes people in our community who come and volunteer as well. So we're all in this together.
Yeah, we definitely want to thank you so much, Bill, for coming here today. And we want to thank all of you out there who were listening and watching along. I almost feel like I have to listen and watch this episode 2 or 3 more times. It's been such a really rich experience, and there is so much in here. And it's all fat-free. And I hope that you guys also feel the same. And we always are so thankful to you listening. And we know that you're out there supporting us, and we're supporting you as well. And we just thank you and look forward to seeing you again and hearing you again and having you hear us again in the next episode. So this has been the Two World Podcast with Jacob, myself, and of course today our special guest, Bill Seymour. Thank you.